You think the most dangerous men in America are dead or gone. Think again. Right now, they're alive, buried alive, inside a concrete tomb called ADX Florence. They don't touch, they don't speak, they don't even see the sky. Yet somehow, their secrets still leak out. In the heart of Colorado's high desert lies the world's most secure prison, a place the FBI once called a clean version of hell. But beneath the silence and steel doors of ADX Florence lie 7 secrets, dark truths about the inmates who live there, the guards who control them, and the invisible war that's been raging for decades. The Silence Code. Inside ADX Florence, silence isn't just a rule, it's a weapon. Every sound echoes like a confession. A cough in one cell can travel down the entire tier, bouncing off reinforced concrete and steel. Guards hear everything, but inmates hear more. The Bureau of Prisons designed ADX to end what they called the communication problem. After decades of gang wars inside federal prisons, they needed a place where no one could send orders, start riots, or even whisper a threat. According to federal reports, ADX was built to hold the worst of the worst, inmates like bombers, cartel bosses, gang leaders, and terrorists. But inside, they share one thing: isolation. Each man is sealed behind a 4-inch thick steel door, then another barred door, inside a cell no bigger than a parking space. A single slit of glass gives them 90 minutes of light a day, if the sun is kind. But here's the first secret: silence doesn't mean peace. Federal documents and court filings reveal that ADX has its own code, an invisible network of communication that survives despite every security measure. Guards call it ghost talk. Inmates call it the wire. The system is simple but nearly impossible to stop. Messages are written on toilet paper, rolled tight, and flushed through the plumbing system at coordinated times. Others scrape words into food trays using dull plastic spoons. When trays are stacked for collection, another inmate reads the message before a guard notices. According to a 2015 investigation by the Marshall Project, one former correctional officer claimed he once found an entire communication network running between different housing units. Inmates had managed to sync their flushes, creating what one investigator called a prison-wide Morse code. Even the smallest noise, a tap, a scratch, a hum, could carry meaning. You can lock a man's body, one former inmate told the New York Times. But you can't lock his voice. We find ways. The Bureau of Prisons denies any organized network exists. Officially, ADX is airtight. But court cases like Silverstein versus Bureau of Prisons tell another story, one of paranoia, control, and psychological warfare. Inside the control unit, where inmates serve decades of solitary confinement, the rules of human interaction are rewritten. Some prisoners haven't spoken to another living soul in years. Psychologists who have testified in federal lawsuits describe a pattern they call SHU syndrome, a psychological collapse that can cause hallucinations, rage, and self-harm. In 2012, several inmates filed a class action lawsuit, Baycoat versus Federal Bureau of Prisons, claiming that ADX's isolation was driving men insane. Court records show phrases like self-mutilation, feces smearing, and delusional paranoia repeated over and over. One psychologist compared the facility to a laboratory for despair. The government settled that lawsuit in 2016. Officially, they agreed to transfer severely mentally ill inmates out of ADX. Unofficially, many remained hidden, forgotten, or simply reclassified as stable. But deep within the walls, some inmates used that silence to their advantage. One inmate, a high-ranking gang leader from California, reportedly ran operations across 3 states while confined at ADX. According to federal prosecutors, he coordinated drug shipments and even ordered assaults using coded letters disguised as legal correspondence. When investigators broke the code, they realized the men had effectively built an empire from solitary confinement. That's the paradox of Florence: the more control the system creates, the more creative its prisoners become. Another secret, rarely discussed, lies within the architecture itself. The entire facility is designed for psychological dominance. The cells are angled so that no inmate can see another human being directly. Every movement is controlled by remote switches and reinforced doors. Even the yard, a small concrete pen known as the cage, is designed so the sky appears like a framed photograph. Inmates call it the box. You walk in circles, said a former inmate interviewed by The Guardian. and you forget what straight feels like. For some, that isolation becomes unbearable. For others, it becomes power. According to investigative journalist Mark Benelli, who interviewed multiple ex-staff members, several inmates at ADX treat silence as currency. If you stay quiet long enough, guards begin to trust you. They might let you work a cleaning shift, earn an extra phone call, or get access to the library. But silence can also hide danger. During one internal investigation in 2008, officers discovered that 2 inmates who hadn't spoken in months had actually been passing notes hidden in the bindings of law books. The exchange was traced back to a contraband smuggling ring inside the world's most secure prison. How those items entered the facility remains unclear. But a declassified report from the Bureau of Prisons mentions employee compromise, a sanitized phrase for bribery or manipulation. Guards are not immune to the mental toll either. Multiple former staff have admitted that working at ADX feels like being buried alive with them. Turnover is high. The silence gets to everyone. You start hearing things, one guard said anonymously. After a few months, you can't tell if it's them or your own head. By design, no inmate at ADX is supposed to have contact with another. Yet, stories of invisible communication, bribery, and coded notes continue to surface. And that leads to the first truth about ADX Florence's most notorious inmates. Their power never fully dies. It just hides behind the silence. The hidden hierarchy. In a place where no one is supposed to speak, there shouldn't be a hierarchy. Yet inside ADX Florence, even silence has ranks. Every man in that fortress, from terrorists and serial killers to cartel lieutenants, lives under the illusion of total isolation. But behind those soundproof walls, invisible chains of command quietly shape life and death within the Supermax. This is the hidden hierarchy, a social order so subtle that even the prison itself denies it exists. It began, according to retired correctional officer testimonies and federal reports, sometime in the late 1990s, when ADX was still new, its concrete barely cured. The first generation of inmates included gang leaders pulled from federal and state prisons across America. Men like Thomas Silverstein and Barry Mills from the Aryan Brotherhood, Louis Beam's network of right-wing militants, and high-ranking members of the Mexican Mafia, Nuestra Familia, and the DC Blacks. Each was sent to Florence for the same reason: they couldn't be controlled anywhere else. But when you gather the most manipulative and violent minds in one place, control becomes a myth. A 2006 Bureau of Prisons memo, later cited in the Denver Post, admitted that even within solitary confinement, social structures persist. In plain terms, hierarchy can't be locked down. It just adapts. The birth of the silent order. Former intelligence analysts within the Bureau described the early years of ADX as a kind of behavioral experiment. They wanted to see if complete isolation could extinguish gang loyalties. Instead, it refined them. Communication restrictions forced inmates to evolve their strategies. What used to be organized through shouts across the yard became coded through commissary requests, legal mail, and body language observed during brief medical visits. By the mid-2000s, intelligence officers had documented something extraordinary. Certain inmates, though physically separated, were coordinating behavior, refusing meals at the same time, synchronizing grievances, and even influencing cell block moods. Investigators named it the silent order, a term never officially recognized, but whispered among guards who worked the night shift. According to court exhibits from disciplinary hearings, the influence of certain shot callers reached across housing units. One inmate could raise or lower the tension of an entire block simply by the way he stood when the food slot opened. A tilt of the tray, a look through the window slit, it meant something. It's like telepathy, one correctional psychologist later told The Atlantic. You think they're broken men, but they're running psychological chess games every day. The men they called the Ghost. Among the names that circulated inside Florence, one stands out: the Ghost. His real identity remains classified, but numerous accounts describe him as a lifer from a Midwestern gang, transferred to ADX after multiple prison murders. He didn't speak for 7 years. Didn't write, didn't gesture, didn't even look up during counts. But according to a 2011 internal security report, other inmates mirrored his behavior, entire ranges falling into silence when his door opened. One ex-guard told The Guardian that, "You could tell who ran the place, and it wasn't us." Rumors claimed the ghost could control inmate strikes through silence alone. He never broke rules, so discipline couldn't touch him. When questioned, he simply stared, until the guard walked away. His existence symbolized something larger: power through invisibility. While gang hierarchies in normal prisons rely on violence, ADX birthed a hierarchy of restraint. The less an inmate reacted, the higher his perceived rank. The one who stayed silent longest became untouchable, both feared and respected. Corruption in the shadows. Of course, no power system survives without cracks, and ADX is no exception. Federal indictments and whistleblower statements have revealed that a small number of correctional officers were compromised over the years. Some smuggled contraband, tobacco, USB drives, even small notes disguised as Bible pages. Others were blackmailed, manipulated by inmates who learned their weaknesses through observation. In 2017, the Department of Justice quietly confirmed the arrest of a staff member from another Colorado facility linked to contraband distribution at ADX. Though the Bureau denied widespread corruption, investigative journalists found patterns suggesting otherwise. The Office of the Inspector General reported multiple employee integrity cases between 2010 and 2018, most sealed from public view. These weren't casual bribes. They were strategic penetrations, inmates trading silence for secrets. As one former intelligence officer explained, "If you can't break the wall, you infiltrate the cracks." Psychological control. The hidden hierarchy wasn't only about power among inmates, it extended to the staff. ADX's environment turns everyone into a participant in the same game. Guards compete for control, psychologists for compliance, and administrators for calm. When one inmate throws feces or starts a hunger strike, it's not random, it's often a signal. Every disruption has a message, and decoding it becomes a matter of survival. Court testimony from Baycoat v. BOP revealed that staff often experienced learned helplessness. The same condition inflicted on prisoners. When you spend years opening and closing doors by remote control, never touching another human being, empathy dies. And when empathy dies, corruption follows. When the walls listen. There's a saying among ADX staff, the walls talk. But what they mean is that the building itself records behavior, every sound, every footstep, every vibration. The architecture becomes an informant. Each cell has microphones, but their placement also amplifies paranoia. Inmates suspect they're being recorded even when they're not. That psychological uncertainty keeps order, or so it's intended. But the hierarchy learned to weaponize that, too. False signals, intentional noises, became a way to manipulate guards. One inmate would tap 3 times at 2 a.m., another would flush at 2:03. The guards would assume a code was active and flood the tier with light and noise, keeping everyone awake for days. That exhaustion fractured both sides, until the order restored itself. It was domination through chaos. A game with no winner. Federal psychologists have a term for the culture at ADX, the closed loop. It's a system where control becomes addiction, both for inmates and staff. Prisoners crave autonomy, officers crave obedience. Each action triggers the other in an endless feedback cycle. That's why the hidden hierarchy endures. It isn't written, spoken, or proven. It's felt. A glance through a window slit. A silence that lasts too long. A rumor that echoes even in soundproof halls. "There's no top of the pyramid here," said a former warden in an off-record interview. "There's just the ones who've learned how to live in the dark." The unseen transfers. Sometimes, when an inmate grows too powerful, too silent, he disappears overnight. Officially, it's called a transfer for administrative reasons. Unofficially, it's exile. A black van arrives at dawn. The cameras cut for maintenance. The inmate is moved to another undisclosed facility, often without notice to his family or lawyer. Other inmates wake to find the cell empty, lights still flickering. One former Florence officer described these removals as ghost extractions. You never see the paperwork. They're just gone. Some of those transfers reportedly ended up in high-security wings of Terre Haute, Leavenworth, or USP Marion. Others, according to unconfirmed accounts, were taken to classified facilities where extreme isolation continues indefinitely. The hidden hierarchy proves something terrifying about human nature. Even in a world built to erase identity, people rebuild it. Even in silence, they form power. And even when the system hides its mistakes, the echoes remain. ADX Florence may call itself the Alcatraz of the Rockies. But beneath the concrete, it's a living organism, adapting, learning, watching. And its most notorious inmates. They aren't just surviving the system. They're shaping it. The Invisible War. In the depths of the Colorado desert, surrounded by nothing but rock, fences, and silence, lies a war no one admits exists. No guns. No riots. No witnesses. Just a quiet battle between men who can't move, and a system that can't bend. This is the Invisible War, the endless conflict between ADX Florence's inmates, its guards, and the unseen government forces that monitor both. It's a war fought in codes, psychology, and policy, where information is the ultimate weapon. The war no one sees. ADX Florence was never just a prison. It was built as a message, a symbol of what happens when control becomes absolute. According to Bureau of Prisons blueprints and security briefings obtained through Freedom of Information Act requests, ADX was designed to be the end of the line. No one escapes. No one rises. No one resists. But in trying to build the perfect cage, they created a paradox, a place so controlled that even small acts, a cough, a code, a look, became rebellion. A former intelligence officer who worked in the facility's counter-threat unit described it as a chessboard made of human minds. Every inmate was a potential threat, every guard was a possible leak. The result was a cycle of suspicion so deep that nobody truly knew who was winning. The eyes in the walls. The surveillance systems at ADX are among the most advanced in the world. Thousands of cameras, motion sensors, and microphones feed into a control room that looks like something out of a Cold War bunker. Every cell is under near constant observation, but that's only part of the story. Declassified Department of Justice reports mention the use of what they call pattern recognition monitoring, algorithms that track inmate behavior to predict violence before it happens. The system flags anomalies, pacing patterns, meal refusals, breathing rhythms. When the data spikes, a guard is sent. Sometimes they intervene before anything occurs, sometimes too late. To the Bureau, this technology is a triumph. To the inmates, it's torture. You start feeling like the walls are alive, said a former ADX inmate in an interview with Vice News. They're watching when you sleep, when you pray, when you break. But even under that watchful eye, secrets find their way out. Encrypted letters disguised as legal mail. Messages hidden in the seams of clothing sent to outside lawyers. And sometimes, information leaks the other way, from the Bureau itself. Intelligence games. Behind the scenes, ADX Florence isn't only run by correctional officers. It's also watched by multiple intelligence branches, the FBI, the NSA, and, at times, military counterintelligence. According to a 2019 Politico report, several high-profile terrorism convicts held at ADX were part of ongoing counter-terror investigations, even years after sentencing. In those cases, the prison became an experiment in psychological extraction. Officials would monitor reactions to specific triggers, a light left on longer than usual, a guard assigned who resembled someone from their past, a news article slipped into their mail. Each detail was meant to provoke emotion, anger, guilt, confession. Some call it interrogation through isolation. Others call it torture by design. And yet, inmates found ways to fight back. They stopped reacting. They turned their silence into a shield. They created their own counterintelligence, observing guard shifts, memorizing sound patterns, tracking the timing of meals to predict staff rotations. They're locked up, but they're studying us, said a former guard who resigned in 2015. After a while, you feel like you're the one in the cage. The psychology of power. The invisible war isn't fought with violence, it's fought with identity. ADX strips inmates of everything: name, touch, sunlight, sound. What's left is a battle for meaning. Psychologists who've worked inside call it existential warfare. The system tries to erase individuality, while inmates fight to reclaim it, by any means necessary. A single word scratched into concrete becomes a declaration of existence. A hunger strike becomes a statement of control. Court filings from Cunningham versus Bureau of Prisons show detailed reports of self-harm and resistance acts designed to assert presence. One inmate went years without speaking a word, until one day, he began reciting court cases aloud, every day, 4 months. Not madness, strategy. It forced the Bureau to recognize him, to file reports, to acknowledge he still existed. That's what ADX does. It turns survival into rebellion. The Ghost Files. There are rumors, some supported by partial FOIA documents, of ghost inmates. Men who were never officially listed in the public inmate database. They appear only in internal memos and redacted court filings. Transferred in secret, housed in sealed wings of the facility known only to a handful of officials. A 2020 Intercept investigation hinted at a special management access program inside ADX, a unit so classified that even most guards couldn't enter. These cells allegedly housed individuals connected to national security cases, whose identities remain redacted under protective classification. The Bureau of Prisons has never confirmed or denied these claims. But several attorneys representing ADX inmates have reported unexplained disappearances, clients vanishing from the system overnight, with no notice, no record, and no appeal. It's the darkest layer of the invisible war, when even existence itself becomes classified. When the system turns on itself. For years, former ADX staff have come forward, quietly, often anonymously, describing a kind of moral erosion inside the walls. In 2019, a senior officer resigned after reporting psychological contamination. He claimed that the methods used to control inmates were beginning to affect staff behavior, paranoia, emotional numbness, obsession with control. The Inspector General's office found rising mental health issues among employees. Suicides, divorces, breakdowns. One report concluded that ADX does not merely contain violence, it breeds it in silence. Guards began to fear not just the inmates, but each other. They accused one another of leaking information, of cooperating with outsiders. The chain of command fractured. The same tactics used to dominate prisoners, isolation, monitoring, punishment, began turning inward. The system had infected itself. Echoes from the abyss. In 2022, an internal bureau memo leaked online. It described increased instability inside the facility, unexplained communication patterns, simultaneous disturbances across multiple units, and what it called psychological synchronization among inmates. The memo was swiftly removed, but journalists archived it. The phrase psychological synchronization fascinated experts. Was it coincidence, or something more? Had decades of isolation produced a kind of collective mind, inmates adapting in ways the system couldn't predict? A former ADX psychologist said it best. You can't bury human connection. You can only force it underground. And when it comes back up, it's stronger. The final secret. The last secret of ADX Florence isn't about escape, violence, or power. It's about what happens when you trap the human mind long enough to study it. Everything at ADX, the soundproof walls, the sealed yards, the automated lights, was designed to create total control. But instead of control, it created something else, adaptation. The human brain learned to survive the unendurable. To communicate without sound. To fight without movement. To lead without presence. In trying to build the perfect prison, the government may have accidentally built the perfect experiment, proof that even in absolute isolation, the mind refuses to die. You can silence the body, one former inmate wrote in a letter smuggled out through his attorney. But the soul finds a frequency they can't hear. Epilogue, the war continues. Today, ADX Florence still stands, its walls unbroken, its reputation intact. But behind those layers of concrete and steel, the war still rages. Every light flicker, every distant echo, every sudden silence, it all means something to someone. And maybe that's the truest secret of all. ADX Florence was built to crush rebellion. Instead, it taught the world that control, no matter how absolute, always cracks. Because even in the quietest place on earth, someone is always listening.